If he came back now, this is not a coincidence. If every time he reappears, your heart starts racing, your mind gets confused, and the guilt comes back, this is not love. And more importantly, it does not mean you were wrong about him. Many people arrive here carrying the same silent question. Greater than, did I overreact? Was the problem actually me? If he came back, does that mean he cared? That question doesn't appear randomly. It almost always shows up the moment the narcissist returns. Usually when you were just starting to feel a little better. You may have gone days, weeks, or even months without contact. You cried. You replayed conversations. You blamed yourself. You tried to make sense of what happened. And then, just when the pain starts to soften, when your thoughts become quieter, when he's no longer in your mind all the time, he comes back. And the moment he does, something shifts inside you. Confusion floods back. Guilt self-doubt intensifies. The wound you thought was healing opens again. You don't fully understand why, but you feel it. This is where many women make the most painful mistake of all. They interpret his return as proof of love. It isn't. Relationships with narcissists follow an invisible but highly predictable pattern. And that pattern is not driven by love. It's driven by emotional control. The narcissist doesn't come back because he misses who you are. He comes back because he misses what you provided emotionally. Maybe you were the one who listened endlessly, explained yourself, tried to fix things, apologized first, adjusted constantly, absorbed the emotional chaos. When you step away, he doesn't lose the relationship, he loses access. And when that access is interrupted, something very specific happens inside him, something few people explain, but something that completely changes how you understand his return. Because what you're feeling right now, this mix of hope, fear, confusion, and guilt is not a sign that love is still alive. It's a sign that the emotional bond is still active in your nervous system. And he senses that. Even if he isn't consciously aware of it. Even if he would never admit it. That's why, before any explanation, apology, or conversation, he watches. He watches how fast you respond. He listens to your tone. He notices if you explain yourself. He checks whether guilt still lives inside you. Because his return is not a conversation. It's a test. And if you don't understand that test, you risk falling back in, not because you're weak, but because you are conditioned to respond this way. In the next part, I'll explain what happens inside the narcissist's mind and body when he realizes he's losing you emotionally, and why this realization triggers his return at exactly this moment. What happens inside him when he realizes he's losing you emotionally? When a narcissist begins to sense that you are no longer emotionally anchored to him, something destabilizing happens inside his internal world. Not sadness, not heartbreak, something far more threatening to him: loss of control. A narcissist does not experience connection the way a healthy partner does. Connection, for him, is not mutual. It is not relational. It is regulatory. You were regulating his emotional state, often without realizing it. So when you stop reacting the way you used to, he doesn't think, she's healing, she's moving on. What he feels instead is, I'm losing access. And that loss triggers a deep internal alarm. Here is what most people don't understand. A narcissist does not have a stable inner self. His sense of identity depends on external emotional feedback. Your reactions, your explanations, your tears, your guilt, your effort were not just responses. They were mirrors. You reflected him back to himself. When that reflection disappears, his internal system starts to fracture. This is why his return often feels sudden, urgent, or strangely timed. It's not coincidence. It's not intuition. It's not love. It's ego destabilization. When you begin to detach emotionally, his nervous system reacts before his mind does. He experiences agitation, restlessness, irritation, anxiety, an urge to do something, not because he misses you, but because his emotional equilibrium has been disrupted. A woman once said, "He didn't panic when I left. He panicked when I stopped responding." That sentence reveals everything. Your absence didn't scare him. Your emotional unavailability did, because without your emotional engagement, he has to face something he avoids at all costs: his own emptiness. And instead of sitting with that emptiness, reflecting, or growing, he does what he has always done. He reaches outward to re-establish control. That's why his return often follows this pattern. Sudden messages, vague concern, emotional curiosity, unexpected softness. or subtle guilt-inducing remarks. These are not gestures of repair. They are checks for access. He is testing whether you still explain yourself, you still feel responsible, you still react emotionally, you still doubt yourself. Because if you do, the system can restart. And here's the part that hurts to realize, but sets you free once you see it clearly. He doesn't return because you are irreplaceable. He returns because you were predictable. Predictable in your care. Predictable in your guilt. Predictable in your effort. Predictable in your emotional availability. When that predictability disappears, his control weakens. This is why his return feels confusing, instead of comforting. Your body senses the old pattern, but your intuition knows something is wrong. And that internal conflict between what you feel and what you're beginning to see is exactly where healing starts. In the next part, I'll explain why his return messes with your mind so deeply, and why even knowing all this doesn't immediately stop the emotional pull. Why his return triggers confusion, guilt, and self-doubt even when you know the truth. One of the most frustrating parts of this experience is this. Even when you know what he's doing, even when you recognize the pattern, even when you understand the manipulation, his return still shakes you. You might think, I see it now. I won't fall for it again. I'm stronger than this. And yet, the moment he reaches out, something inside you shifts. Your clarity blurs. Your confidence wavers. The guilt returns. This does not mean you are weak. It means your nervous system was conditioned inside the relationship. Here's what almost no one explains clearly. Trauma bonds don't live in logic. They live in the body. During the relationship, your nervous system learned to associate emotional pain with emotional connection. Love was inconsistent. Care was unpredictable. Safety was conditional. So your system adapted. It learned to scan his tone, anticipate his moods, prepare for withdrawal, brace for criticism, seek relief through reconciliation. These responses became automatic. So when he returns, your body reacts first, long before your mind has time to process what's happening. This is why his messages feel disorienting. They activate old survival pathways. Even a simple message can trigger anxiety, hope, fear, confusion, urgency to respond. Not because you miss him, but because your body remembers the cycle. There's another layer that deepens the confusion. His return often comes with just enough kindness to reopen doubt. Not full accountability, not real change, just enough softness to make you wonder, maybe I misjudged him, maybe I was too sensitive, maybe he's different now. This is not accidental. Narcissists don't need to convince you completely. They only need to create uncertainty. Because uncertainty keeps you engaged. Uncertainty keeps you questioning yourself. Uncertainty reactivates the bond. And guilt plays a powerful role here. Many survivors carry a deep sense of responsibility for other people's emotions. You may have been taught directly or indirectly that maintaining peace was your job. So when he returns, sounding wounded, confused, or vulnerable, your empathy activates. You feel responsible to respond, obligated to explain, compelled to reassure, pressured to be fair. That's not love. That's conditioning. He knows that if you start explaining, apologizing, or defending yourself, the emotional door is open again. And the most painful part, he doesn't need you to believe him. He only needs you to engage. Because engagement restores his sense of control. This is why his return feels emotionally loud, even when his words are minimal. The power is not in what he says, it's in what his presence reactivates inside you. But here's the shift that begins to change everything. The confusion you feel now is not a sign that the bond is strong. It's a sign that the bond is weakening. Why? Because you are now aware of the pattern. Awareness doesn't break the bond instantly, but it destabilizes it. In the next part, I'll show you the exact tactics he uses when he senses that your awareness is growing, and why recognizing these tactics changes how your body responds over time. The predictable strategies he uses to pull you back in. When a narcissist realizes that your awareness is growing, he doesn't suddenly become honest, accountable, or emotionally mature. What he does instead is far more familiar, and far more calculated. He shifts strategies. These strategies are not random. They are not emotional impulses. They are predictable attempts to regain emotional access. A woman once said, "Every time I started seeing things clearly, he became exactly who I needed him to be." That wasn't growth. That was adaptation. Here are the most common strategies narcissists use when they feel you pulling away emotionally. and why they work so deeply on people who are empathetic, self-reflective, and prone to self-blame. 1. The soft return. I've changed without evidence. This is often the first move. He comes back, calmer, kinder, more reflective. He may say things like, "I've been thinking a lot. I finally understand. I wasn't myself back then. I miss what we had." But notice what's missing. Specific accountability. Real responsibility. Consistent behavioral change. This version is not about repair. It's about disarming your defenses. Your nervous system remembers the early version of him, the one who felt safe before the chaos. This tactic reactivates that memory. 2. The guilt hook, making you the one who gave up. If softness doesn't work, guilt usually follows. He reframes the story so that you're the one who abandoned him. You didn't try hard enough. You were too sensitive. You misunderstood his intentions. This activates your deepest wound, the fear of being unfair. You don't want to be the person who gave up, so you start questioning yourself again. That self-questioning is the opening he's looking for. 3. The crisis card, creating urgency. When he feels real distance, he often manufactures urgency. Messages like, "We need to talk. This is serious. You owe me a conversation. You can't just disappear like this." Urgency bypasses logic. It triggers instinct. Your body reacts before your mind can slow things down. This tactic is not about resolution. It's about forcing emotional engagement. 4. The silent punishment, hoping you'll panic. Sometimes, instead of chasing, he withdraws again. This silence is intentional. It's designed to reactivate the old fear. What if I lose him forever? But something is different now. Your silence is real. His silence is manipulation. And when it doesn't work the way it used to, he escalates. 5. The identity attack. No one will love you like I did. This is one of the most damaging strategies. He implies that your expectations are unrealistic. Your emotions are too much. Your needs are unreasonable. You'll regret losing him. This isn't honesty. It's psychological shrinking. If he can make you doubt your worth, he can recreate dependency. 6. The role reversal, making you the problem. When all else fails, he accuses you. Become cold, selfish, dramatic, not the same anymore. This is projection. Your growth threatens him. And labeling your healing as a flaw is his last attempt to regain control. Here is the truth that brings clarity. Narcissists don't want you back. They want the version of you that was easier to control. And the more you recognize these strategies, the less power they have over your body, not just your mind. In the next part, I'll explain why these tactics still affect you emotionally, even when you see them clearly, and how your nervous system begins to unlearn the response over time. Why your body still reacts even when your mind knows better. One of the most painful moments in this journey is realizing this truth. Even when your mind understands what he's doing, even when you can name the manipulation, even when you tell yourself, "I see it now," your body still reacts. Your chest tightens, your stomach drops, your thoughts race. The urge to explain yourself returns. And that reaction often leads to shame. Why am I still affected? Why can't I just be done? What's wrong with me? Here is the truth you were never taught. Nothing is wrong with you. Your nervous system was trained inside the relationship. Trauma bonds are not emotional weaknesses. They are biological adaptations. Your body learned, over time, that emotional safety depended on staying attuned to him. It learned to monitor his tone, his moods, his silences. It learned when to speak, when to stay quiet, when to apologize, when to try harder. That learning didn't happen through logic. It happened through repetition. Every cycle of tension, emotional withdrawal, fear, brief relief, wired your nervous system more deeply. So when he returns, even with a simple message, your body responds before your thoughts can intervene. This is because the nervous system's job is not truth, it's survival. And survival, inside that relationship, meant staying connected to the person who controlled the emotional environment. That's why your reaction feels automatic. Your body reacts to patterns, not promises. You may know he hasn't changed. You may know his words don't match his behavior. But your nervous system doesn't evaluate character. It recognizes familiarity. Familiarity once meant safety, even if that safety was conditional and painful. Intermittent kindness created dependency. The inconsistency in the relationship created powerful neurological wiring. Your body learned that relief only came after distress, and that relief usually came from him. That created an internal loop. Pain gives hope, gives relief, gives attachment. So when he reappears, your body anticipates relief, even if your mind knows better. This is not love. This is conditioning. Your empathy was used as an access point. If you are empathetic, reflective, or emotionally responsible, you were especially vulnerable. You were taught implicitly, or explicitly, that his emotional state was partly your responsibility. So when he returns, sounding confused, wounded, or regretful, your body reacts with concern. That reaction is not weakness. It's your empathy responding to a familiar role. Healing doesn't start by stopping the reaction. This is crucial. Trying to force yourself to not feel or not react often. INCREASES, internal pressure. Healing begins when you stop judging the reaction. The reaction is not a command. It's a signal. A signal that your body is still catching up to what your mind already understands. And the moment you stop shaming yourself for the reaction begins to soften. Your body learns safety through consistency, not confrontation. Each time you pause before responding, choose not to explain yourself. Allow the urge to pass. Stay grounded instead of reactive. You teach your nervous system something new. I am safe without engaging. This is how the bond weakens, quietly, gradually, biologically. Here is the truth that brings relief. You are not failing at healing because your body reacts. You are healing precisely because you are no longer obeying the reaction. In the next part, we'll explore the moment when your nervous system begins choosing you instead of the cycle, and why that moment doesn't feel dramatic, but changes everything. When your nervous system stops choosing him, there is a moment in healing that almost no one prepares you for, because it doesn't feel like victory. It doesn't feel empowering. It doesn't feel dramatic. In fact, many people mistake it for emotional emptiness or indifference. But in reality, it's one of the most important turning points in the entire process. It's the moment when your nervous system stops choosing him as the reference point for safety. A woman once said, "I still thought about him, but my body didn't move toward him anymore." That sentence describes this stage perfectly. For a long time, your nervous system believed that emotional survival depended on staying connected to him, reading his moods, anticipating his reactions, adjusting your behavior to avoid conflict or abandonment. That belief kept the trauma bond alive. But slowly, something begins to shift. Not because you forced it, not because you confronted him, not because you got closure, but because your body started learning something new through repetition. Nothing terrible happens when you don't respond. At first, this learning is subtle. You notice that the urge to explain yourself fades faster. The anxiety spike doesn't last as long. You pause before replying instead of reacting instantly. His silence doesn't feel as dangerous. Your body stays calmer than you expected. These moments may seem small, but biologically, they are enormous. Your nervous system is updating its internal rules. Before, it believed, if I don't engage, something bad will happen. Now, it begins to learn, if I don't engage, I'm still safe. That update changes everything. This is where real detachment begins, not in your thoughts, but in your body. You may still feel memories. You may still have questions. You may still feel sadness at times, but your body no longer organizes itself around him. You stop bracing for impact. You stop waiting for his next move. You stop monitoring his emotional state. Your internal focus turns inward. You begin choosing regulation over reaction. Instead of rushing to soothe discomfort by engaging with him, your system starts finding relief elsewhere, in quiet, in space, in grounding, in routine, in your own presence. This is not avoidance. This is self-regulation, and it's something you were never allowed to develop fully inside the relationship. This stage often feels confusing because it lacks intensity. Trauma bonds are intense. They feel urgent. They feel consuming. Healing does not. So when intensity disappears, many people think, why don't I feel more? Why does everything feel flat? Did I lose something important? But what you lost was not love. You lost hypervigilance always disguises itself as connection. Here is the truth most survivors need to hear. When your nervous system stops choosing him, the bond is already breaking even if your mind hasn't fully caught up yet. Your body leads the way out. And once your body no longer reacts the way it used to, the narcissist's power begins to collapse naturally, without confrontation, without explanation, without drama. In the next part, we'll talk about what comes after this shift, emotional emptiness that often appears, and why it's not a setback, but the space where your real self begins to return. When the bond breaks, and emptiness appears, and why this is not a relapse. After your nervous system stops choosing him. Many people expect relief to arrive immediately, peace, strength, clarity, but instead, something unexpected often takes its place: emptiness. Not sadness, not longing, not pain in the way you knew it before, just a quiet, unsettling absence. A woman once said, "I wasn't hurting the way I used to, but I didn't feel like myself either. It felt like something went missing." That feeling is frightening, and it's also one of the most misunderstood stages of healing. Here is the truth that changes everything. Emptiness is not missing him. Emptiness is missing the cycle your nervous system was addicted to. For a long time, your emotional world was filled with intensity, anticipation, anxiety, relief, confusion, emotional highs and lows. Your nervous system adapted to living in constant stimulation. Even when it hurt, it was familiar. Familiarity feels safe to the body, even when it isn't healthy. So when the trauma bond begins to dissolve, all that stimulation disappears at once. What's left feels like nothing. This emptiness is your nervous system detoxing. The chemicals that once flooded your body during the cycle, adrenaline, cortisol, dopamine from intermittent relief, begin to drop. Your system is recalibrating to a baseline it hasn't experienced in a long time. That recalibration feels uncomfortable, not because something is wrong, but because something ended. Emptiness appears when survival mode turns off. For months or years, your body stayed alert, monitoring his tone, preparing for conflict, anticipating withdrawal, bracing for emotional shifts. When that vigilance stops, your system powers down. Silence replaces noise, stillness replaces urgency, and stillness can feel terrifying when you're used to chaos. This is where many people misinterpret healing as loss. They think, why don't I feel more? Why don't I miss him the way I expected? Why does everything feel flat? They assume something is wrong with them. But what actually happened is this. Your nervous system finally has space, and space feels empty at first, because it hasn't yet been filled with you. Emptiness is the doorway to identity returning. During the relationship, your emotional energy was organized around him. His moods, his needs, his reactions shaped your internal world. When that organizing force disappears, your system needs time to reorganize around yourself. That reorganization doesn't feel exciting. It feels unfamiliar. But unfamiliar is not unsafe. Do not rush to fill this emptiness. This is crucial. Many people try to escape this stage by reconnecting, distracting, overworking, seeking intensity elsewhere, questioning their decision. But emptiness is not a problem to fix. It's a transition to allow. If you stay with it without judgment, something begins to happen quietly. The emptiness softens, the neutrality emerges, the emotional charge fades, and in that neutrality, you begin to feel something new, peace without effort. In the next part, we'll explore how emptiness slowly turns into emotional neutrality and why. Neutrality is the first real sign that the narcissist no longer has power over you. When emptiness turns into emotional neutrality, the moment power shifts. After the emptiness lingers for a while, something subtle begins to change. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but quietly, in a way that's easy to miss if you're not paying attention. The emptiness doesn't disappear, it evolves. It turns into neutrality. A woman once said, "One day I realized his name didn't create a reaction in my body anymore. I noticed it only because it felt strange." That strangeness is important. It's the nervous system learning a new language. Neutrality is not numbness. Neutrality is not indifference. Neutrality is not emotional shutdown. Neutrality is the absence of threat. For a long time, your body reacted to him automatically. His presence or absence meant something. It carried emotional weight. It dictated your internal state. Now, slowly, that weight begins to lift. Neutrality is when your body stops bracing. You notice small shifts. His silence no longer triggers panic. His messages don't create urgency. Memories surface without pulling you back. You don't rehearse conversations anymore. Your body stays calm even when you think of him. Nothing dramatic happens. You just don't react. And that lack of reaction is not weakness, it's regulation. This is the stage where many people ask the wrong question. They ask, why don't I feel more? Why don't I hate him? Why don't I miss him the way I thought I would? And then the old doubt creeps back in. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I exaggerated. Maybe I'm the problem. But here's the truth. Neutrality doesn't mean it wasn't real. It means your nervous system no longer sees it as a threat. Neutrality is emotional immunity. A narcissist's power depends on reaction. Confusion, guilt, hope, fear. Any emotional movement feeds the cycle. Neutrality feeds nothing. When neutrality appears, manipulation loses impact. Guilt no longer sticks. Charm feels hollow. Silence feels irrelevant. This is why, if he returns at this stage, he often feels weaker to you. Less convincing. Almost transparent. You're not stronger because you tried harder. You're stronger because your body stopped participating. Neutrality is the bridge between survival and identity. You are no longer surviving the relationship. But you're not fully living as yourself yet either. You're in between. And this in-between stage is sacred. It's where your nervous system finally understands. I don't need chaos to feel alive. I don't need intensity to feel connected. I don't need to explain myself to be safe. This is why neutrality feels quiet instead of empowering. Empowerment comes later. Confidence comes later. Clarity comes later. Neutrality is simply peace without effort. And peace without effort is unfamiliar to someone who lived inside emotional instability for too long. But unfamiliar does not mean wrong. Here is the most important truth of this stage. When neutrality appears, the narcissist has already lost power over you, even if you don't feel healed yet. Because power was never about love. It was always about reaction. And your reactions are no longer available. In the next part, we'll talk about what begins returning once neutrality stabilizes your identity, your intuition, and the sense of self that was slowly eroded inside the relationship. When your identity begins returning to you, and you finally stop doubting yourself. When neutrality settles in, something quietly powerful begins to happen, something many survivors don't recognize at first because it doesn't arrive as confidence or strength. It arrives as recognition. You begin to recognize yourself again. A woman once said, "It wasn't that I suddenly felt strong. I just felt familiar to myself." That familiarity is identity returning. During the relationship, your sense of self didn't disappear overnight. It was slowly reshaped, adjusted, softened, questioned. You learned to prioritize harmony over honesty, peace over truth, connection over self. Over time, you stopped trusting your internal signals. That's why the doubt was so persistent. Am I too sensitive? Am I asking for too much? Why does everything feel like my fault? Those questions were not your personality. They were symptoms of emotional erosion. Identity returns when you stop organizing yourself around someone else's emotions. As neutrality stabilizes, you notice subtle but profound changes. You stop rehearsing what you'll say. You stop filtering your feelings. You stop scanning for emotional danger. You stop blaming yourself automatically. You begin trusting your reactions again. This is not empowerment yet. It's orientation. You are no longer lost inside someone else's emotional map. You begin to see the relationship clearly, without minimizing or exaggerating. This is one of the most healing shifts of all. You no longer need to label him a villain to justify leaving. You no longer need to blame yourself to explain staying. You simply see the truth. It wasn't healthy. It wasn't safe. And it wasn't your fault. That clarity doesn't come with anger. It comes with calm. Your intuition returns, not as fear, but as guidance. Inside the relationship, intuition felt like anxiety, because it was constantly overridden. Now, without emotional noise, intuition feels steady. You notice what drains you, what feels peaceful, what feels wrong without needing proof, what you no longer tolerate. You don't argue with yourself anymore. This is identity anchoring itself internally again. You stop viewing yourself through his eyes. This is crucial. For a long time, your self-image depended on his approval, his mood, his withdrawal, his criticism. Now, your worth becomes You no longer ask, what would he think? Was I fair? Did I explain myself enough? You begin asking, what do I feel? What do I need? What do I want now? Those questions signal the return of self. You finally understand this truth, without shame. You didn't stay because you were weak. You stayed because you were empathetic, hopeful, and emotionally responsible. And you didn't leave because you stopped loving. You left because loving yourself required clarity. This is where the old question dissolves. The question, was it me? It loses its emotional charge, because you now see Your reactions made sense. Your pain was real. Your confusion was conditioned. Your intuition was right. And when that realization lands, something settles inside you permanently. In the final part, we'll bring this journey full circle, showing how identity stabilizes into emotional independence, and why the narcissist can no longer access the version of you that once doubted herself. When your story finally stops being about him, there comes a moment in healing that feels almost ordinary, and yet it changes everything. Not because something dramatic happens, but because something quietly ends. Your story stops revolving around him. A woman once said, "I realized I wasn't asking questions about him anymore. I was asking questions about my life." That is the moment your emotional center of gravity shifts back to where it always belonged, inside you. For so long, your inner world was organized around his behavior, his moods, his silence, his approval, his reactions, his unpredictability. Your thoughts, emotions, and even your sense of self were shaped in response to someone else's instability. That wasn't love. That was adaptation. And adaptation kept you alive, but it also kept you stuck. When your identity returns and stabilizes, something fundamental changes. He is no longer the reference point. You no longer ask, "Why did he do this? Did he ever love me? What does it mean that he came back?" Those questions once made sense. They were part of survival. But survival is no longer your mode. Now, your questions sound different. What feels peaceful to me? What do I need to feel safe? What kind of connection do I want to build? That shift is freedom. Freedom is not forgetting him, it's outgrowing the emotional role you played. You don't need closure conversations. You don't need explanations. You don't need apologies that come too late. Because closure arrived internally. The moment you stopped needing him to confirm your reality, you finally understand this truth without bitterness. He didn't confuse you because you were naive. He confused you because confusion kept you emotionally available. You didn't doubt yourself because you were insecure. You doubted yourself because your reality was constantly undermined. And now that the undermining has stopped, self-trust returns naturally. This is the stage narcissists cannot reach. Not because you blocked them. Not because you confronted them. Not because you won. But because your emotional world is no longer responsive to their patterns. They cannot manipulate. Someone who no longer explains themselves. Someone who no longer seeks validation. Someone who no longer feels guilty for having boundaries. Someone who no longer confuses intensity with love. Your nervous system no longer reacts. Your identity no longer bends. That is the quiet collapse of their influence. You are not colder. You are clearer. This is important. Many survivors fear they've lost their softness. They haven't. What they lost was emotional self-abandonment. You can still love. You can still feel deeply. You can still be empathetic. You just no longer sacrifice yourself to be chosen. And this is where the original question finally dissolves. Was it me? No. It was a dynamic that required you to disappear in order to survive. And you are no longer willing to disappear. That's not failure. That's growth. If this journey mirrored something inside you, stay here. The next video will explore something many people experience at this stage. Why narcissists try to come back. When you're finally free, and why their return no longer works. You are not broken. You were adapting.